Sometimes, when you look back at your teenage years, you can't help but shake your head and think, how did I even survive that? I was around 14 or 15 at the time, and honestly, I thought I was invincible. My best friend and I spent almost every night together at her house. She was an only child, and her mom was pretty laid back, letting us do whatever we wanted. We had no curfews, no rules. We could go out at midnight if we felt like it, and we did. It felt like nothing could ever go wrong. But looking back, I realize how reckless we were. We put ourselves in situations we didn't fully understand, trusting strangers without thinking twice. If we wanted to hang out with people we just met, we'd hop in their car without a second thought. We were lucky. So many things could have gone terribly wrong. And one night, they almost did. That night started like any other. We were supposed to stay over at a guy's place we had just met. Everything seemed normal at first until his grandmother kicked us out in the middle of the night. It was already past 1 a.m., and we had no ride, no phones, and no place to go. It felt like an adventure at the time, walking alone through the silent streets, just the two of us. But soon enough, we were forced to make a choice that could have changed our lives forever. And that's where it all began, just two young girls, trusting too easily and walking straight into the unknown. It wasn't long before we realized how stuck we were. We had nowhere to go, and the streets felt emptier with every step. Walking back to my friend's house seemed like the only option, even though it was more than an hour away. We didn't have any phones to call someone, and neither of us wanted to admit we were scared. So, we kept moving, trying to act like it was no big deal. At some point, we decided to take a shortcut through a used car dealership. We thought it would save time and get us off the main roads where we could be seen. It felt like a smart idea at the time: cut through, stay low, and get home faster. But things didn't go as planned. Before we made it halfway across the lot, a flashlight beam caught us. A security guard called out, asking what we were doing there. And just like that, we were caught in a situation we didn't expect. What started as a simple walk home was about to turn into something much more dangerous. The guard didn't seem angry, just curious. He asked why we were out so late and where we were headed. We told him the truth, that we had been kicked out and were trying to get home. He looked at us for a moment, then warned us that if the police saw us wandering around at this hour, we'd probably get into trouble. That made us nervous, but we didn't know what else to do. Then, he offered us something unexpected. He asked if we wanted to use his phone to call someone, but neither of us had anyone to call. My friend's mom didn't have a phone, and I knew my mom would lose it if she found out what we were doing. So we told him we were on our own. That's when he made another offer. He said he could pay for us to stay at a nearby motel for the night. It seemed strange, but we were tired and out of options. Without thinking too much about it, we said yes. At that moment, it felt like we were being saved. But we had no idea that things were about to take a very dark turn. We climbed into his car, and right away things started to feel off. My friend quickly jumped into the back seat, leaving me to sit up front with him. As soon as we hit the road, he started talking about how he was a war veteran, how he got injured in combat, and how he'd do anything for a massage. The way he said it gave me chills. Neither of us knew how to respond, so we just laughed it off awkwardly, hoping he'd drop the topic. But he kept going, asking if we were any good at giving massages. We said no, trying to sound as casual as possible. Then, just before we reached the motel, he stopped at a bank to get cash. When he got back into the car, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. He pulled a handgun from his hip and locked it in the glove box right in front of me. He didn't say a word about it, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I sat there, frozen, trying not to show how scared I felt. We were trapped in the car with him, and all we could do was hope we'd make it through the night. When we arrived at the motel, he parked the car and told us to wait while he went inside to get the room keys. We sat there in silence, too nervous to say anything. When he came back, he handed us the keys and smiled. But just as we were about to get out, he asked if he could come up with us, said we could repay him with a massage as a thank you. Without thinking, we both blurted out, "No." We grabbed our things and rushed up the stairs without looking back. My heart was racing the whole way up. As soon as we got into the room, we slammed the door and locked every lock we could find. We didn't say a word to each other, just sat there, listening for any sound outside the door. We stayed awake all night, too scared to sleep, waiting for the sun to rise. Every creak in the hallway made us jump. I kept thinking about his gun in the glove box and how easily things could have gone wrong. We knew we had just escaped something bad. We didn't know how bad yet, but we weren't going to stick around to find out. As soon as the first light of morning broke, we grabbed our stuff and left the motel without looking back. The walk home felt longer than usual, but we didn't care. We were just relieved to be out of that place. Neither of us said much on the way. It was like we were both trying to process what had happened. When we got back to my friend's house, her mom didn't even ask where we'd been. It was like nothing had happened. We didn't talk about it, either not to her, not to anyone. We were just happy it was over. At the time, it felt like we had dodged something bad, but we still didn't realize just how lucky we had been. Years went by, and that night became just another strange memory. I didn't think much about it until one day, everything changed. I was scrolling through Facebook, minding my own business, when I saw a news article. The headline caught my attention right away. It was about an army veteran who had been arrested for kidnapping and assaulting two teenage girls. As I read further, my stomach dropped. It was the same man, the same security guard from that night. The face in the mugshot looked older, but it was him, without a doubt. In that moment, the reality of what could have happened hit me like a ton of bricks. If we hadn't run, if we had let him follow us into that room, things could have ended very differently. I sat there for a long time, trying to shake off the chill that ran down my spine. We thought we were just being polite, accepting his help that night. But in reality, we were so close to becoming his next victims. Looking back, I realize how close we were to real danger. At the time, we thought we were just two kids on an adventure, but that night could have easily taken a deadly turn. It wasn't luck that saved us. It was the small bit of instinct that told us to lock that door and stay inside. If we had ignored that feeling, who knows what would have happened? Sometimes we don't realize how dangerous a situation is until it's too late. That's why it's so important to trust your gut, even when things seem harmless. If something feels off, it probably is. Thank you for listening to our story. If you enjoy this kind of content and want early access to more, consider supporting us on Patreon. You'll get to hear new episodes before anyone else and help keep our stories coming. Stay safe and always trust your instincts. Working the night shift can be quiet, but it's the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I was the only employee on duty after 5 p.m. in a big motel with 50 rooms spread over 3 floors. Most nights were slow, and I'd check in business travelers or workers staying for a few nights. We had a mix of guests, some polite, some who trashed everything in sight. That's just how it was. The building layout was simple. The front desk faced the entrance, with a staircase nearby and elevators to the upper floors. The first floor had fewer rooms, mostly for elderly guests or those who checked in late. The second and third floors were busier, with more rooms reserved for work groups or long stays. I always tried to keep things running smoothly, but there were nights when things didn't go as planned. On those nights, being the only person in the building made every sound echo, and the empty hallways felt endless. It was on one of those nights that everything changed. And to this day, I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't followed my instincts. It started like any other night. Around 9 p.m., a beat-up black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. I got ready to check in the guest, assuming it was just another worker coming off a long shift. A man stepped out, covered in dirt, and walked toward the front desk. He smelled like oil and sweat, but that wasn't unusual. He handed me his ID, and I scanned it. His name was Michael. When I asked for his vehicle details, he hesitated, like he didn't want to give them. I explained that if he didn't, his truck might get towed by morning. Eventually, he gave in. Then he requested a second-floor room close to the lobby stairs. I thought it was a little strange, but I've learned not to ask too many questions. After giving him his room key, I explained the rules and pointed him to the stairs. He grabbed his bags and headed up without saying much. I figured that would be the end of it, but something about him made me uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I had a feeling that this wasn't going to be an ordinary night. Not even 10 minutes later, Michael came back down the stairs, looking frustrated. He said the key I gave him didn't work. I explained that room keys sometimes deactivate if they're kept near phones or magnets. I made a new key and offered to go up with him to make sure it worked. Once we reached the room, I unlocked the door, and he went inside without saying much. I walked back to the lobby, hoping things would settle down. But when I checked the cameras, something felt off. His truck was gone from the parking lot, but I hadn't seen him leave. There was no mention of anyone else staying with him, and the side doors only opened from the inside or with a key. I told myself it was nothing, maybe he had parked somewhere else. But a knot formed in my stomach, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A few minutes later, Michael came back down, but this time he didn't head straight outside. Instead, he sat in the lobby, staring at the TV without really watching it. I kept an eye on him from behind the desk, feeling more uneasy by the minute. His behavior had shifted. He seemed jumpy, whispering to himself like he was having a conversation only he could hear. Every so often, he glanced at the front door, like he was waiting for someone or something. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but his presence made it hard to think straight. I finally told him he couldn't stay in the lobby because I had to close things up. That's when he asked me something that sent a chill down my spine. He wanted to know if I could take him back upstairs to his room. I refused, explaining that I wasn't allowed to leave the lobby. I offered to watch him on the cameras to make sure he got to his room safely, but that didn't seem to calm him. He stood there for a moment, still whispering to himself, before heading back up the stairs. Something told me this wasn't the last I'd see of him that night. It wasn't long before Michael came stomping back down, slamming doors behind him. His face was twisted with anger, and he started yelling that I had stolen his phone. He accused me of plotting something against him, throwing wild claims I couldn't make sense of. I tried to stay calm, but inside, my heart was racing. I told him I hadn't left the lobby since I helped him with the room key, but he wasn't listening. I just wanted him gone, so I searched the couches in the lobby to humor him. Instead of a phone, I found his credit card tucked between the cushions. I handed it over, hoping that would be enough to end the situation, but it only made him angrier. He stormed out the front door, and I hoped that would be the last of it. But my gut told me it wasn't over. I locked the doors and kept my eyes glued to the cameras, waiting for whatever might come next. After Michael left, I stayed on high alert. My boss told me to lock everything: front doors, side entrances, even the fire exits, just to be safe. I did it quickly, checking each door twice. I could feel my anxiety building with every second. When I got back to the office, I locked that door too, hoping it would keep me safe if things escalated. I kept my eyes glued to the security cameras. That's when I saw a car slowly circling the parking lot. It would disappear behind the building, then reappear at the front, never stopping, just driving in loops. I called the hotel next door to ask if they had seen the same car, but they said it didn't belong to any of their guests. The pit in my stomach grew deeper. Something was definitely wrong. Then, out of nowhere, Michael came back inside, blocking the front entrance. He looked calmer but more focused, like he had made up his mind about something. He told me I needed to go outside with him to help with his car. His voice was steady, but there was something threatening in it. I refused, knowing it wasn't safe. At that moment, I knew I had to stay inside, no matter what. Michael stood there for a moment, glaring at me. Then, without warning, he turned and sprinted out of the building. I watched the cameras, but he disappeared into the night, and the circling car was gone too. I stayed on edge until the morning shift arrived. When my replacement walked through the door, I felt such a huge wave of relief that I almost cried. I told her everything and made sure the lobby doors stayed locked. We deactivated Michael's key cards and left instructions to call the police if he came back. I even had my Uber driver check the parking lot to make sure it was clear before I got in his car. Michael didn't return that night or the next. I hoped that would be the end of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. A month later, just when I thought I could relax, Michael showed up again. This time, he was driving a newer SUV, a maroon one. He acted like nothing had happened and asked if he could get a room. Luckily, other staff members were with me, and I told him he wasn't welcome here. I watched closely as he left, making sure he didn't come back. What stuck with me most wasn't just the strange behavior or the new car, it was that Michael remembered my name. At first, I thought it made sense since I usually wore a name tag, but then it hit me. I hadn't been wearing one that night. Somehow, he knew my name without me ever telling him. After that, I stopped using my real name at work. Management let me wear a fake name tag from then on, and I never worked a shift alone again. Even though Michael never came back, I stayed cautious every night, double-checking every door and keeping an eye on every guest. It's hard to say what might have happened if I had stepped outside with him that night. But one thing I've learned is to always trust that uneasy feeling in your gut. It might be the only thing standing between you and danger. Turning 21 should be exciting, a night full of memories with friends and loved ones. That's what I thought as I planned my birthday weekend in April 2008. I had been living in Denver for a year, working a temporary job at a nonprofit in Boulder. My girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my best friend, Tim, made the long drive to visit me for the celebration. Since drinking wasn't allowed at the dorms where I lived, I booked a hotel room downtown for the weekend. It seemed like the perfect plan, a place to relax, party, and have fun without worrying about rules. At least, that's how it felt at the time. We didn't know that this seemingly harmless decision would turn into one of the most unsettling nights of our lives. The hotel looked decent enough when we first arrived, nothing fancy, but not run down either. It sat in a busy part of the city, so we felt safe. But the more time we spent there, the more it felt a little off. All the rooms opened out into a central courtyard, which made it easy to see anyone coming or going. It was like the whole place was designed for people to keep an eye on each other. Inside the room, things were simple. We had two queen beds. One bed was right next to a big window that gave us a view of the courtyard and the parking lot. The other bed was near the bathroom, tucked in a corner that felt a little too hidden. At the time, we didn't think much about it. We were just happy to have a spot where we could relax and enjoy the weekend. But looking back, I realize how exposed we really were. The day went by in a blur of drinks and laughter. We spent the whole afternoon hopping from bar to bar, celebrating my birthday. By the time we got back to the hotel, it was already past 1 a.m., but we weren't ready to call it a night. We kept the party going in the room, talking, drinking, and enjoying the moment. Tim and I sat at the foot of one of the beds, chatting and staring out the window. My girlfriend was lying on the other bed, flipping through the TV channels. Everything felt normal until I heard the soft sound of a door opening. I figured it was just my girlfriend getting up to use the bathroom, so I didn't think much of it. But a strange feeling settled over me, and I couldn't shake it. It was like something in the room had shifted, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. That's when Tim leaned in and whispered, "Did you hear that too?" A chill ran down my spine. Something didn't feel right, and we were about to find out why. I glanced over at my girlfriend, expecting to see her getting out of bed. But she was still there, lying exactly where she had been, focused on the TV. My stomach dropped. If she hadn't moved, then who opened the door? Tim and I exchanged a look, both of us realizing at the same moment that something was off. Slowly, we turned our heads toward the dark entryway near the door. At first, it was hard to see anything in the shadows. But then, out of the corner where the wall met the door frame, I saw him, a man standing completely still, pressed into the darkness like he was trying to blend in. It felt like time stopped. My heart raced as I stared at the stranger, trying to figure out how long he had been standing there. I wanted to say something, do something, but fear locked me in place. We weren't alone in the room, and now we knew it. The silence in the room was unbearable. None of us moved, and for a moment, it felt like we couldn't even breathe. Tim, trying to stay calm, spoke first. "Hey man, can we help you with something?" His voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. The man shifted slightly, just enough to step into the dim light. His expression was blank, and he looked us right in the eye. "Is this room 1709? He asked, his voice low and flat. Tim, keeping his cool, shook his head. "No, it's not," he answered quietly. We stood frozen as the man stayed there, staring at us, like he was deciding what to do next. After what felt like forever, he gave a slight nod and turned toward the door. Without another word, he slipped out into the hallway and disappeared. We didn't move for several moments, trying to process what just happened. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing with questions. Who was that man, and how did he get into our room? Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew we weren't getting the whole story. Once the shock wore off, I grabbed the phone and called the front desk. I told them what had just happened, expecting them to have some kind of explanation. The person on the other end seemed unfazed. "Oh yeah, that guy was drunk," they said. "He must have gotten confused about which room he was in." That answer didn't sit right with me, so I handed the phone to Tim to see if he could get more information. This time, the staff said something different. "Actually, he's not a guest here." Now we were even more confused. If he wasn't staying at the hotel, how did he get in? Later, my girlfriend called the desk herself, hoping for clarity. The person she spoke to gave a third story. "There isn't even a room 1709 in this building." Every version of their story just made things worse. We had no idea who that man was, how he got into our room, or what he wanted. All we knew was that something about this whole situation was very, very wrong. We spent the rest of the night pacing around the room, trying to calm down, but the fear stayed with us. None of us could sleep, knowing that someone had been in our space without us realizing it. We kept asking ourselves the same questions. How did he get in? What was he planning to do? And why did the hotel staff seem so careless about the whole thing? We thought about calling the police, but in the end, we decided against it. Maybe it was the drinks, or maybe we just wanted to move on from the whole thing. We stayed for the rest of the weekend, but the sense of unease never left. Even after we checked out and went back to our normal lives, the memory of that night stuck with us. Every now and then, my wife and I still bring it up, wondering what really happened and how close we might have come to something much worse. Years later, that night still haunts me. Whenever we stay in a hotel, I can't help but think back to the man in the doorway. The feeling of vulnerability has stuck with me. I always make sure to use the deadbolt and the latch on the door, no matter how safe the place seems. I often wonder about the stranger and what he wanted. It's a reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. My wife and I have agreed that we'll always take precautions, even if it seems silly. That night taught us to be aware of our surroundings and to trust our instincts. Even when everything appears fine, we know now that it's better to be safe than sorry. The memory serves as a warning that not all guests are friendly, and sometimes the scariest moments happen when you least expect them.